As always, hope you all had a good breakfast, right? Because we have a good 4 hours, 4.5 hours session ahead of us before lunchtime. And this morning, I can assure you that there'll be more tools that we'll be learning today, right? So it won't be just concepts and theories. There'll be a lot of learning that we'll do. Uh, and we have also planned to kind of make this a little interesting. I have two activities lined up for you. My colleague Ramnath also has some very interesting videos to share and activities to do. So let's try to make it more hands-on. And like how we closed yesterday's session with a lot of discussion and all that, let us keep this open. So at any time, you can please raise your voice. Since I'll be sharing my screen, I won't see you if you're raising your hands or if you have anything on comment, because my comment box is still not activated. It's still, not there that I can use. But that said, please shout out and say, Ram, stop, and I'll stop, and I will be happy to engage with you all in a discussion, right? In a dialogue, sorry, not a discussion, in a dialogue. So, but before we start, I would like to ask some of you a couple of easy questions. Basically, what did we revise yesterday, right? I mean, what did we learn yesterday? So, can anybody tell me how did we start yesterday's session? Yesterday morning, Dr. Sudipto, he spoke about a lot of very important things, right? He set the context to design thinking. So can you tell me what all he discussed yesterday?
Good morning, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Yesterday we thought about what is design thinking, and he gave a description about design thinking, and he was saying that with the circus example, he gave a good description about it. And he said about what are all the steps, basic steps in design thinking. And that was being elaborated by him in 2 sessions. And in the afternoon, you were telling about for subject, what are all the thing you can apply in design thinking, L0 to L3. And you have said step by step how we can frame a syllabus. You have taken one subject and you have explained perfectly. That is what it being, we have learned yesterday in design thinking.
Brilliant.
I think I have covered everything.
Brilliant, brilliant. Yes, you gave an L0. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Can anybody tell me what are the 3 laws of design thinking? While it was introduced in the morning, we also discussed this in the afternoon at the end of the session. Hello, sir. Good morning. Raju, sir. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning.
Sir, can you tell me what are the 3 laws that we learned yesterday? The 3 laws of design thinking.
One is the solution for the problem.
Not actually, sir.
Laws of the design thinking.
Yes, there are 3 laws, 3 rules of design thinking that we discussed. We also elaborated on that yesterday in the evening before I closed my session.
Okay.
One madam also wanted to know what's the difference between one rule. Yes, Divya madam.
Empathy.
So the 3 rules were, the first one is less is more. The second one was the last 2% is almost equal to 20%, 200%.
Yes.
And the third one was how do you, like, what is it that law of prioritization? I think theory of prioritization.
Exactly. The 10, 100 and 1000 gram problems. Exactly. Thank you, ma'am. Yes, sir. So yes, these all work towards creating a solution. So your point and the purpose of the laws is correct, sir. Yes, but I just wanted to know what the 3 laws are. So yes. Okay. Right. And one important point you touched upon is empathy, right, sir? So empathy is like the foundation. Unless you empathize with your stakeholder, with the end user, you cannot create a solution.
Yes.
So it is, what do you say? It is like oxygen that's necessary to breathe.
Yes, yes.
If there is no empathy, there is no design thinking. That is why, sir, if you remember when Dr. Sudipto at the morning, he explained what is design thinking. There are 4 things that he said. The first thing is that it is human-centric. That is the differentiator. That is the USP of design thinking, that the human being, the end user, is at the center of the problem. Then it is future-focused and it adds value, right? So that's how it is. So the first point is always the user. So you are correct, sir. It is empathy. Now, before we get into today's topic, you would have noticed that Dr. Sudipto explained a 5-step process that IDEO propagates. IDEO is a world famous design thinking company who have handled projects across the world, from US to Africa to Europe, Saudi Arabia, anywhere and everywhere they'll do something or other. They work with governments, they work with private bodies, they work with organizations, schools, and so on. Now they have a 5-step process that ends with prototyping and testing. In my session in the afternoon, I also explained a 5-step process, which is 60% similar, right? It has empathy, it has define, it has divergence, convergence, and it ends with communication. So you might ask, why do we have a different form of design thinking process? Why can't we follow IDEO's process if it is very successful for them? Let me narrate a very small story to tell you why it is important that design thinking has to be made customized for your culture. Way back in 2008, there was a very popular organization in India called Polaris Software Labs Limited. For those of you who understand or who are aware of financial technology software, right, like Infosys and Wipro, mainly Infosys and TCS, there was this slightly smaller organization called Polaris, which is headquartered in Chennai. The chairman is Arun Jain, who's initially from Delhi, but he settled in South India. And he created this entity. Till around 2013, 2014, Polaris was a services company. So it was very much like your TCS, like your Infosys and other companies, which were offering services, which was not a product company. But when this gentleman went to America in 2008, 2009, he went to Silicon Valley and other places as part of his business trips and all that. And he also wanted to see what is different that is happening in those geographies. Why is it when you say innovation, product development, brilliant brands, why do we always think of Silicon Valley, right? So he went there to do his research with his team. And when he returned, he brought in a concept called design thinking. And he said, hey guys, you know what? These companies all adhere to design thinking. It is a very interesting model. We should also follow that, because if it works for them, why can't it work for us? They are also human beings. We are also human beings. They work on solving problems. We are also working on solving problems. How do we make our services better? Can we apply design thinking? So the company was very energetic. They said, yes, we should try to do this. And we tried to apply design thinking in our situation. And to be very frank with you all, we completely failed. Miserably failed, so bad that we thought, okay, design thinking will not work for us. This was also the time when Arun Jain was thinking, why should India be known as a services country? We always have back office, BPO, services. Basically, services company is like an order taker. The client will tell us, hey, do this software, we'll do it and give it for them. Why? Because doing it in India is cheaper, right? Our resources, we take lesser salary. If Americans want to do it in America, they charge more salary. So because of the cost benefit, they give the work to us. But Arun and the team in Polaris that at that time wanted to slowly make Polaris a product company also. That we should own the IP. India should create products, that make in India concept. We should be proud in creating software that is used across the world. So while all these thoughts were going on, when we thought design thinking will work, it was a nasty surprise. We failed very miserably. So that's when we thought, okay, wait a minute. Then something is fundamentally wrong in the way we are approaching design thinking, right? If it works for Americans in America, it should work for Indians in India, because it's a plain vanilla concept. It is not a law that is made for America, right? It is a concept that is applicable for everybody. So that's when we took a step back and we said, okay, first you need to have something called the design mind. You need to work on a design culture in the organization. Just because I bring in design thinking, I cannot expect everybody to understand it or follow it. Everybody should come to the same page, should understand what it is, should feel for that, and then only it will work, right? We are all academicians here because we have a feeling for the subject, because we feel for the student community. And based on our knowledge, our wisdom, what we have learned from our seniors, we want to pass it on to the next generation to make the society bigger. That is our higher agenda, right? So likewise, we also thought that, wait a minute, before applying design thinking, we need to change our mindset. And that's when we focused a lot on the design mind, which is the most important aspect, even before design thinking comes in. So what we did was we took a step back. We did some research. We found out, okay, there are something called the musical notes, Sepia, Decaf, and Val that Dr. Sudipto explained yesterday morning. And we started working on that. And that's when we also approached that design thinking cannot just happen in any room, in any space. You have to bring collaborators together. You should first of all know who your stakeholders are. Very important. Who are all the people you are going to work with, the people you are going to impact, the people who will in turn impact you, like government organizations, right? So all that needs to be done. And in 2014, in 2014, a company called Intellect emerged from Polaris, so came out of Polaris. And Intellect today is a listed product company which creates softwares, yes, but the organization owns it. So we are not a services entity. Being a product company is very important because that is when you change the way the game is played. No more are people giving you orders. Imagine a tailor. If you are a tailor, what happens? People come to you, they say, I want a shirt stitched, I want a kurta stitched, I want a churidar stitched. You take the measurements and you stitch and you give it to them. You are taking an order and you are delivering the product. But here we are like a ready-made shop. We know what the trend is, we know what people want, we know what the fashion is, and we will propose the products for the people, for the customers. Customers buy it. Sorry. So that is the kind of approach we took after 2014. Until now, we are happy to say that design thinking is working brilliantly for us as an organization, and it is working very well with many companies that we have worked with, including government organizations. So that was very quickly to kind of tell you why design thinking is important. But even more than applying design thinking, it is very important to have that mindset as a design thinker so that we are able to use that tool effectively. So with this, I will now get into today's session. Let me quickly share my window. Yes, and as always, the regular question, can you see my screen, my slide?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So yes, today's topic is on this, knowing your stakeholders, right? We learned about approaches to design thinking, laws and all that. But as I said at the outset a few minutes ago, design thinking is all about the person at the center, the human being at the center, the end user at the center. And that said, we need to know what who the stakeholders are. Now, if you look at this interesting picture that you see before you, I had also used it yesterday, but I didn't explain it yesterday. This is a very nice symbolic picture of how a design thinker should look at the world. There are different stakeholders who are involved in your project, in what you are doing. And it is important for a design thinker to be completely cognizant or aware of who these stakeholders are, to communicate with them as per their requirement, as per their need to communicate with them, and bring them all together while working on a project or on answering a proposed solution. So it is very important to understand your stakeholder universe. So in this session, what I'm going to tell you all is these things. Why is it important to know your stakeholder, right? What is the stakeholder universe? What does it consist of? There are so many things in the universe, right? If you look at our own galaxy, we have the sun, the planets, their respective satellites. You have an asteroid belt. You have comets which keep visiting every now and then. So many things that are there, right? So what is the universe, the stakeholder universe for us? Then we look at a very important relationship matrix called the power versus interest matrix. Then we move on to the next segment of understanding users' need. So the users have a typical need. How do you understand that? And very importantly, how do you frame that? Because framing your problem statement is very important. Likewise, understanding the user's need is very important, right? So we frame the user's need. And for both these things, there'll be small, I plan to give you a small 20-minute window so that you can actually start working on it a little bit hands-on. So if you have any queries, we can get them answered right during the session. So we'll have one window of exercises for stakeholders and one window of exercises to write your user need or to frame your user need based on a problem statement. I'll give you a very simple and a very contextual problem statement, right? And of course, we'll end the session with question and answer. So yes, the most important thing is to know your people, right? To know who your stakeholders are. Yesterday, when we saw the L0 layout, right? The purpose of the tool was basically to help you decompose your environment, your ecosystem. So we looked at an example. We looked at a 7 piece of marketing And we looked at how that 7 P's of marketing is a logical approach to create a L0, while you can completely, teach the 19 most important key strategic concepts of marketing, right? So that was an approach. If you look at an example that was used little earlier before that, we created a simple L0 of the complete first year. So you had semester 1, semester 2, semester 3, semester 4, and so on, which is the complete picture of your course. And then that was the L0. And then we went to L1, which was basically semester 1 became the main topic. And under semester 1, what are all the subjects that we have? Then we went to L2, wherein we took on one topic and we further broke down. So it's basically a concept of decomposing, like how all organic matter decomposes in nature, right? After its lifespan is gone. Likewise, we decompose the subject so that from the big picture, we get into the finer details, right? Likewise, just as it is in a subject or in a department, it is very, very, very important to know who are all the people you are going to work with. Because imagine an organization like your college or your university. Now, who are all the stakeholders here? You have the student community, you have the parents of the students, you have the society at large, which very much depends on your organization. You have teaching faculty, your peers, your colleagues, your seniors, your juniors. You have the management of the institution. You have the government, which lays down regulations. You have, in fact, even shops, right? Stationery shops and other book shops and all that, which sell stationery item, books, and so on to the student community. You have the traffic system. You might ask, what does all this have to do with what you are doing in terms of understanding your ecosystem, your stakeholders? Traffic opens when everything's opened up and there's regular traffic to the college. We often see that there's a lot of traffic jam in front of the campus, and there's issues when cars come in, bikes go out, and all that stuff. So your local traffic system plays a very important role. The weather plays an important role. Like you might suddenly get rains like that you see in Chennai. So how do you bring that into your ecosystem, into your radar, so that you know that classes carry on without any distraction, without any issues. So it is very important to look at the big picture and understand who all are your stakeholders. But now when that is said, you might say, this is too big, right? It is very confusing. How will I know who are all the people who are going to be involved in what I do? Yes, I know there are students. Yes, I know there is management. Yes, I know there is government. These are all the things. You have bodies like Atal and all that, which dictate terms and policies and all that, which we adhere to, which brings a discipline to what we do. But that said, traffic, society, bookshops, what do they have to do with us? I mean, that if you then look at it, anybody is a part of the ecosystem, right? Actually, it is true. But then to bring a method to the madness, as they say, there is a wonderful framework. And that is the first tool that I would like to showcase to you all today. That tool is called the CATWO analysis, right? So this tool is especially used for better stakeholder management, right? Does anybody know what CATWO is in the audience? Has anybody heard about this tool?
No, sir.
Okay, right. So this is a brilliant tool, and each element of the word CATWO has a very significant position in the way your relationship with that stakeholder group is. So let me get into the details. Okay, so if you want to look at the genesis, the beginning of it, this was started by a gentleman called David Smith way back in 1975, so around 45 plus years ago, right? And this was an approach that he created while working on a soft systems methodology, right? An approach for solving organizational problems. Typically, again, an organization works with many, many different types of people, different departments, different stakeholders. So how do you bring some method to the madness? How do you bring some discipline, some segmentation, so that you are able to relate to each stakeholder appropriately, right? So this is a method that's considered very, very important, especially for understanding who is the stakeholder. How do you bracket that stakeholder or position that stakeholder? And secondly, how do you communicate with that stakeholder? Right? Because you cannot communicate with the government as you communicate with the student, right? You cannot communicate with Atal as you communicate with your institution's management, with your dean or with your HOD, right? So there are different ways in which you communicate, what you communicate, when you communicate, and why you communicate, very importantly. This will help you in framing that. Right. So how does it help? I kind of more or less explained that, but just let us see that once again. First of all, it enlists all the stakeholders who will be affected in what you're doing in one way or the other, right? Whether you're solving their problems or you understand their perspectives, or even if they impact you, like for instance, the government. The government probably does not get impacted by what you do, but what the policies the government lays down will obviously impact the way the organization works, the way you will work. If today the government says there are no colleges due to the pandemic, colleges should shut down again, everything will go online. It's a very bad state, but yes, that's a policy that we have to adhere to. So we immediately ramp up and we see what can be done to take education back to children through the digital format. So that is one example. The second thing is it helps to avoid personal bias and belief because you are able to segment everything very, very critically. So you might assume, okay, where do I put a parent? Is a parent my end user or is a parent my customer? Customers and end users are very different, like I said yesterday. Again, Sudipto sir's example of a baby versus the parent. The baby is the user, the parent is the buyer of the baby product, right? The child product. Likewise, so we might be biased based on our belief, our experience, but here is a framework that helps you to beautifully segment everybody. It unearths the bigger picture, very similar to the L0. So you understand what there is, right? With regards to what the constraints are, challenges are, what the outcomes could be, and all that. So based on the segmentation, you get to understand the bigger picture. And you understand the conflicts between stakeholders. Very important. The government will say something, the college management will want to do something else, right? Just for discussion's sake, the government is there at the higher level. They have their people in various institutions in the society to give them data bottom up. But then as a faculty member, you are very, very closely associated with your students, right? You know the details probably better than the government does. Because for the government, data goes through multiple filters before it reaches to the minister or whoever is the policymaker. But you folks are at the grassroots level. You interact day in and day out with students, with industry mentor, with industry participants, and so on. You have a totally different perspective, right? And there might be a difference in conflict, like the decaf element, doubt, conflict, anger, fear, ego. There could be conflicts because of different perspectives. This will help you how to understand all that. So that is why this framework is absolutely important. So where can CATO be used? So at what part of design thinking process can it be used? For one, if you look at the framework that I spoke about yesterday, the first part is empathy, right? Feel stage. This is where you understand the end users, right? The people whom you are working with, the people whom you are going to work with or work for, right? So this is typically used there along with your L0, along with the empathy map. CATO is also typically used at the initial stage. That said, it does not mean that it ends over there. So once you move on to the next stage, which is define, or you go to the next stage, which is brainstorming and all that, it does not mean that CAT was fixed. Probably while working later on, you might have forgotten a stakeholder, or you might want to repurpose how a stakeholder is positioned. So you can go back to this tool and fine tune it. So that is the beauty of design thinking. A lot of these tools tend to also evolve with the way you're using it. Right? So where is it used? It is used to solve any complex problem where there are multiple stakeholders, many stakeholders, each person having their own vested interest. To change an existing system impacting a variety of people. So it is like an impact that you're creating a larger section of society. So when there is such a system, this tool is used. To enable change management for better adoption of change by stakeholders. So change management is very important here. When you are for example, constituting a change management in the way your institution is going to function, changing in times, for example, the timing of when the institution opens for the day, when it shuts down for the day, when are your exams going to be rolled out, the modality of your exams, and so on. There's a lot of change that happens, right? How do you communicate that? How is it going to be adopted by various stakeholders? That this tool will help you in that. It is used in typical project management, obviously, right? And to launch a concept that will radically change the existing system. So kind of reflects on the change management again. So if you have something and it's being used, everybody is aware of it and it goes on with a certain flow. But suddenly when you bring a change management, there is an inertia for people to immediately change. They wouldn't want to change. Just like the design thinking example I was telling at the outset. When Polaris wanted to bring in design thinking in the organization, complete failure because people did not understand it. Many of them did not even want to try because they felt, hey, we are doing good as well, who we are, right? We are getting good clients, we are making good profits. That why should we change? But change is always looked upon as something very difficult, right? It's that vulnerability zone, like VAL, vulnerability, appreciation, and limiting belief. So getting into a change is always putting you in a vulnerable zone. So this typically helps you in overcoming that, right? So what are the elements of CATWO? I'm sorry, I just thought it will be a little funny if I add Garfield over here, this popular cartoon character, because of the cat and the woe. So if you look at the word CAT, it has three components to it. C stands for customers, A for actors, and T for transformation. Customers are those who face the current problem, those who will be using your solution, so the end user, those directly affected by their idea. So in this case, if you again want to put it contextually to our industry, to the academic industry, customers will also include your users directly affected by your idea. So if the organization says we are going to up the fee by 10% because of whatever the reasons, so the fees, for example, has been 10,000 rupees, it's going to go by another 10%, 11,000 rupees from next year on academic year onwards. It will affect a lot of people, the parents, the student community, banks, because some parents might have taken an education loan, right, to pay their fees, so on and so forth. So customers, so that is all brought into it. Actors, those who actually implement the solution or the transformation. Again, in this example, your academic institution, if you are bringing a change in policy of admission, that for an admission, it is no more just an entrance exam. There is also going to be a panel discussion and followed by an interview so that you really get those deserving students who have it. Then you are an actor, right? You are the person who's actually implementing the change. Or for example, the government, when the government institutes a policy change, right? So they are the actors in this context. The third is transformation. This does not involve writing any stakeholder, because when you're talking of transformation, it is not about a particular stakeholder, but it should be written, or it should be in very clear terms as to address the why, the what, and the how of the problem. So basically, you're also bringing in the element of what is happening here, right? Why is it happening in the first place? Why are you making that change? What is that change? And how are you going to carry forward that change, right? It's all about change management, as you saw in the previous slide, right? That you wish to solve. By clearly thinking and writing, you will think of stakeholders who can be classified in other elements. So why do we bring this element? Though transformation is actually not about a stakeholder, it is more about the why and the what and the where and the how. But by thinking on those lines, you also start thinking about who will it impact. So thus, this is more like a trigger. It's more like a boost in the arm that kind of helps you to, identify different stakeholders. If you kind of vaguely want to remember, yesterday while talking about brainstorming very briefly, I also spoke about a tool called Metaphor. If you remember, Metaphor is a tool that forces you to look at the picture in some other style. For example, how am I going to change the syllabus of my school or of my college, of my first year computer science students? And if you're brainstorming that, you can probably ideate it to how do I change the tire of my car? So what do you do when you're changing your car tire? They're totally different, right? Makes no sense. But when you're forcing to think of your problem in a different style, that forces you to think of certain areas that you might not have otherwise thought about while working on the actual problem. So likewise, when you think clearly and write clearly about the transformation, you also are forced to think about the various stakeholders who will be impacted by what you're doing. So that is the CAT part of it. The woe part of it is like the word woe, no, like anger and frustration and all that. So that's why I had this picture over here. The first W is basically the worldview. And what is the worldview here? Very important during analysis when thinking beyond the system. So this is like talking about your customers, not the students, but the customers, the society, the industry, the larger world, the larger society at large. So you're not just thinking about your institution, but the impact or the ripple effect that your institution is creating to the larger ecosystem of civilization, if I can put it so. Considering stakeholders beyond the current system, exactly as I said, who will be affected indirectly by the solution or your transformation. So that is the worldview. So looking at a bigger, much bigger picture now. Owners, stakeholders who own the permission to start, stop, pause, or cancel. So there's a difference here between owners and actors. for example, again, in the academic institution, if there is a change, now we all know that board exams can be written in a different way, right? You have it per semester kind of a system here. It's no more the board exam that comes at the end of the year, right? So who are all the actors who will be doing it? Schools tend to do it, the high schools, right? 10th and 12th standard. But who are the owners? It is basically the government, the education department, which said no, because of the pandemic, because the students have not been able to enjoy education the usual way it is, going to class, going to laboratories, practicals, theory, and all that. They've been curtailed because of the digital limitation that we have, unfortunately. We are going to cut down on the syllabus, and to make it even more easier for students, where board exams are going to be divided into a particular style of doing it. So this many percentage for their assignments, so much percentage for attendance, so much percentage for, their subjective answers, MCQs, and so on and so forth. So that's the government, and the government are the owners of this. They are leaders who have the ability to guide the solution as well as to block the solution, right? So while the institution is the actor, these are the owners. And finally, at the end comes the environmental constraints. Okay, what are the constraints here? We are talking of legal issues, political issues, ethical issues, regulations, norm, finance, human resources, so many, or any rules that can hinder a solution's implementation, right? So there are so many constraints. You can also bring in other constraints, like, for example, corruption. When we often know, right, that corruption is there almost at every system, at every level of the system, right? So when that is the case, that also acts as a certain constraint. While we might want to do certain things, there can be certain difficult players in the system, right? So these are all different constraints. So now, while you have kind of, I hope, understood this, do you have any questions that you might want to ask now?
Ram, good morning. Ramnath here.
Hey, hi Ramnath, morning.
Have we told them that one stakeholder can be either this or that as well? For example, one can be an actor simultaneously as well as an owner.
In occasional systems, yes. Thanks for bringing it up, Ramnath. Yeah. So there are certain situations where the actor and the owner can be rolled into one, right? But in such a case, it is still good to know where that overlap happens. So when you are bracketing the actor and the owner, right, it's good you bifurcate them and put them accordingly. For the simple reason, you know how they're connected to each other. You again get to see the relationship, because again, the most important part or the application's core crux is to understand how the entire relationship works. So while segmenting it, you know how the power plays differently across various stakeholders. So thanks, Ramnath. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So if there are no questions now, I would like to move on and explain this with an example, right? And friends, as you all know, this is a problem that many state governments are actually talking about today, right? So this was kind of created a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, when a neighboring state was actually talking on these terms. So for those of you who are probably logged in from your mobile, let me just read this example, this scenario out for you. Imagine that you are the labor minister of a state government in India, and that you are planning to introduce a bill in the state assembly. Now, what is this bill about? The proposed bill is about ensuring 85% of jobs for local or domiciled residents of the state for any government and private companies and NGOs that is operating its business out of your state. So while there is an amount of reservation for the people of that state, right? If it's for Tamil Nadu, for example, for Tamils, if it's Kerala, for Malayalis, if it is for people from Andhra or Telangana, it's for the respective people of that state. But in addition to that, they are also extending this to private companies, to companies like Intellect Design Arena Limited, for example, or for TCS or for Infosys, right? Where 85% of the job should be from that state. This also applies to non-government organizations, for any of those entities that work with the social sector, right? So humongous change that we are bringing about. Also, the bill that you are proposing also mandates that if the hired locals do not have the necessary skills for the job, it is the responsibility of the business to train them in skills after hiring them. So, which means if that, for example, if it is an IT company and the person does not know Java or Python or C++, it is necessary for the hiring company, the company that has hired them, to train them on these softwares, on these languages, right? So based on this situation, who are all the stakeholders according to the CATWO analysis, right? So now you have a problem, you have a scenario, you have an issue. So who are all going to be impacted by this bill? Let us take a look. The first thing, based on CATWO analysis, the customers. So if you consider it, it will be the residents of that state, obviously, right? So these people the people of that state need not migrate elsewhere. They can probably look at more job opportunities within their state. Residents of other states of India, now it's the other side for them, right? It's completely the opposite. Thus far, for the past 2-3 years, I have migrated from Maharashtra, for example, or from Delhi, and I'm working in Tamil Nadu. And if the Tamil Nadu government says, nope, 85% of the jobs go to Tamils, then I will have to pack my bags and go back to my native state, right? So they are being impacted as well. Government, private organizations, and NGOs who are directly affected because of the job factors. And obviously, there are many, many, many more people who are affected by this. So here's an example of your customers. Who are all your actors here? Human resources teams, right? These are the people who are actually doing the job. They now will have to revise the way how they're hired. So if a company typically hires anybody, so for example, we know, right, when a company comes for campus recruitment, what happens? So they interview the candidates, the best students first. There are different cutoffs and so on and so forth. One thing that they do not look upon is where does the student come from? The student can, for example, studying in business, right, can probably come from Kerala, or can come from Assam or Mizoram, or can come from Gujarat or Rajasthan, anywhere across the country. As long as he or she is an Indian citizen, absolutely, the country is open for a job opportunity anywhere, right? But now, human resources teams of various companies have to take a relook at their recruitment policy. Project managers who have non-local members in majority will have to reshuffle. So basically, the team composition changes. If, for example, if my company is in Gurgaon near Delhi, and I have a lot of people from Andhra and Telangana who are part of the computer team, the technical team, because we have a lot of young guys who are good in IT from these states who are a part of the team there. And suddenly the Haryana government says, sorry, this is the policy, so you guys will have to go back. Now, as a project manager, I need to quickly see, okay, who else is there in the organization, in the department who can, come in place of these guys who will have to leave. Or I'll have to recruit local Gurgaon residents and say, okay, gentlemen or ladies, would you like to be part of the team now? Then there's the labor department officials who will have to inspect your place in random, who will have to see if there's compliance and so on and so forth. So these are all the actors who are hands-on when such a change actually happens. If you look at the transformation, so here we are not looking at the people specifically, we are looking at what is happening. So the government feels that injustice is being done to natives by various organizations that run their business purely because organizations look at the outcome. They don't look at a favoritism per se. They don't, typically in private organizations, if a candidate is able to deliver, if the candidate is good, then the candidate is given an opportunity. There's no reservation and all those quota and other things that's typically applied in private entities. Natives will have to leave the state in search of job opportunities, right? So that is one thing. There's a lot of migration. Hello? Yeah, thank you. So basically, there'll be a lot of migration, something probably similar to what we saw at the beginning of the pandemic. Large amount of people moving from here and there, leading to probably a talent drain, right? So that is a problem. To retain local talent and to benefit the organizations of the government proposes 85% of jobs for locals. So there's a proposal that's going here on the why, the idea behind the why and the what is to happen. The bill also mandates that if hired locals don't have the skill, it is the responsibility. So there is some amount of churning that has to happen, some amount of education that has to go on to up the skill of all the resources that are newly inducted into the organization. So these are the activities or the events that actually happen. Now, when we go to the worldview, the second part of CATWO, if you look at the worldview, who are all the compositions over here? The customers of the government, private companies and NGOs will be definitely affected because of the law. Investors and shareholders, promoters, creditors of the organization. So if you're looking at a company, at a listed company, a company which has many shareholders and investors, what's going to happen? Because many a times, especially when you're looking at organizations like investment banking, right? The manager who's holding the portfolio has a very, very good relationship or network with all the investors whose portfolio he holds, right? So typically, if this gentleman, suppose this is happening in Maharashtra, right, in Bombay, the financial capital of India, and now if this gentleman who's hailing, for example, say from Jharkhand, has to return, right? And so what will happen? So what will happen to the organization? What will happen to the investors of that company? How will they look at this perspective, at this change? There's a lot of things happening. Similarly, in an IT company, now suddenly there's a huge flux of employees who will come in and who will go out. How will the investors, if it's a publicly listed company, what will happen to the brand of that organization, right? Training organization, when you look at the third point, new business opportunity for training organizations. So you'll have a lot of new training organizations that come up saying, hey, we specialize in all those computer languages, we specialize in software, this, that. So across the plethora of job profiles, we have a lot of training opportunities, right? A lot of organizations that come up to train local talent. Placement in colleges, as I said earlier, that will change. Students seeking internship and placement, there'll be a big change in that. And leaders from other states, what will happen to the relationship between one state government and another state government? How will they look at it, right? We know that, again, talking about labor and jobs, in South India and Tamil Nadu, we know that there's a humongous amount of labor from Bihar, from Odisha, from West Bengal, from Jharkhand and other places who come and work in the real estate industry here in Tamil Nadu. Huge amount of thing, because they work a little cheaper than the local population here. But when pandemic struck and when they all went back, I mean, there was a large amount of real estate projects came to a standstill. Actually came to a standstill. You can see the concrete structure standing, but no work happening. Not just because of the lockdown, but there was nobody there. It was completely, there was only an old watchman who was probably sitting in front of the entire structure. That's it. Why? If you ask the builders, they'll say, sir, no labor. They're all migrated back to their hometowns. And are they going to return anytime soon? We know from all the reports that we read on news and on newspapers that many of them are having double thoughts on coming back, because you never know what will happen again, right? So that's a large worldview. Who are all the owners here? Like Ramnath aptly brought in, owners can also at times be the actors. Many at times owners are at a higher up level wherein they control stuff. Like in this particular example, who are all the owners here? Obviously the ruling party MLAs, right? The ministers of the ruling party. Also the opposition party, the ruling alliance, because as we saw with the farm laws, right? A law is made, a law can be repealed, so on and so forth. So these are all typically the owners. High party command of the ruling party. So we are getting into a political thing here, but then the picture, the scenario is a political issue. The assembly speaker, right, to maintain law and order in the house. The governor of the state, his signature is required. Regional and national media, how are they going to create the opinion of the people when this thing comes out? Are they going to talk in favor of what the government did, or are they going to talk in against the government? And what does the center have to stay behind all this? Because now, India being a federal system, states are free to do to an extent what they like, but the center would not want to have any discordant, untoward relationship between states. Everything has to be in harmony, considering the larger national security around, right? So how will the government look at this? May they probably pass this bill as a source of employment crisis? Will they do something? Will they pass a larger law that kind of makes all this kind of more sedate? Different issues keep coming up, right? So the central government also plays a major role here as an one. And finally, what are all the environmental constraints when you're coming up with such this thing? Poor execution of the law because of probably bribery, right? So some organizations, some large companies might want to say, hey, you know what? These laborers are cheap coming from other states. I want to retain them because on the long term, I end making up more money. Here, take 1 lakh rupees, look the other side. I'm going to continue with what I'm doing. That is a constraint, right? For the law to be passed. Vested interest groups. So you have a lot of these community-based groups, right? They'll say, no, we need to get this opportunity. Another community will say they need to get the opportunity. You have a lot of trade unions and so on. So that is an issue. So that is one constraint. Legal challenges, right? People will start flooding the High Court and the Supreme Court with PILs, with public interest litigations. And then it becomes a humongous burden on the judicial system of the country to look into this deeply. And like, again, corruption being a big thing, it's almost ubiquitous, right? So we know how corruption is in the country. So that also is an environmental constraint. So what we saw here is basically a very interesting example of CATWO analysis. What I would like you all to do is, if you don't have questions, can you please take around 15 minutes of your time to list, based on the CATWO framework, who are all the stakeholders in the academic system. If you have queries, yes, please do ask them as you're doing it. But I'll give you about 15 minutes to kind of do this. So let me know once you're done. If you have any queries, please do ask. And for your quick reference, I'm going to go back here so that you understand what CATWO is, the composition of CATWO. Right, your customers, your actors, what is the transformation that's happening, the worldview, the owners, and the environmental constraints. Any questions?
Ram, I saw Divya Vijay raising her hand, but I don't know, was it for something else or?
Divya ma'am, yes. Do you have a question, ma'am? Does anybody have any queries?
Sir, can we just take a problem like whether if to start the classes offline for students and then discuss the CATWO on that? Is it possible?
Absolutely, yes, definitely. If you want, you can definitely discuss that here with us, so it will be a learning for others as well. Or if you'd like to try it, as the picture says, pen on paper, you can definitely draw that. So this is just to kind of give you a hands-on exercise. So that's the purpose. Ramnath, are there any other comments?
No. Yeah, I think Divya ma'am has lowered her hand. Might be it was for something else.
Okay.
Nothing for now.
Okay.
As such, no comment. I cannot find any comments or question in the chat box.
Okay, sir. Yes. So it's around 9:50, if I'm not wrong. So probably till around 10 minutes should do. So if you want to know, if any of the participants would like to know again what CATWO stands for, I'll quickly go to that slide so you get an understanding. But I wouldn't want to influence you because it's just an exercise. So you get a little hands-on on it. And like how I was discussing with Shraddha ma'am this morning before the session, I hope you all take these tools, right? Note them down and you put them into practice, because it's easy to forget after a couple of days, right? So the beauty of design thinking is in the doing. So
yes,
please see any opportunity that you have in applying these tools.
So can you bring that slide transformation here?
Transformation, yes, ma'am. To explain what transformation is, here it is. So for those participants who are not able to probably see the screen, transformation is not about listing a stakeholder, but it is about the actual activity that's happening. So what should be written under transformation is, why are you bringing that change? What do you propose to do by bringing that change, or what will be the impact? And how do you propose to bring that change? The why, the what, and the how of it. And the reason for bringing transformation, despite the fact that it is not about a stakeholder, is that when you write the why, the what, and the how, it gives you a very clear picture of who your stakeholders are. You probably might have missed a couple of stakeholders, right? But this will tell you. For again, a small example. If we enter into a lockdown again, the campus closes, things go virtual, then what will happen to the local tea shop outside your campus? what will happen to the bookstore that is across the road, which sells textbooks and pens and other stationery, right? They are also a part of your universe. They are also in a way your customers, right? Because of students who typically buy from them. So when you write this, you also bring into perspective those other elements, the other stakeholders you normally tend to, ignore. That's why.
I listed out some of the stakeholders. Can I read?
Absolutely, sir. Yes, please.
So, parents.
Okay, this comes under what, sir? Under customers?
Customers.
Yes, sir. Please go on, sir.
Students, siblings, cousins, prospective employers.
Okay.
Prospective employers, and the next level of higher educational institutions.
Okay.
Because the outcome of this particular institute will become the input of another educational institution.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Definitely.
And coming to the actors, management, obviously, and the faculty, non-teaching staff, other in the campus, other people who are administering different activities like canteens, hostels, hostel managers.
Okay, sir. So other people like hostel and canteen, I don't know if they'll be actors.
There may be suppliers.
They could probably be not customers, but they could probably come under worldview.
Yes, worldview.
Because they are also affected by what the management is doing. So management faculty are perfect. Absolutely.
Yes.
But canteen and hostel also provide service to students. So they probably will come under worldview, if you ask me, sir.
Yes, yes. And next, government.
Government for what, sir? Under actors?
No. Under environment.
Under environment. Okay, no, environment constraint is different, sir. So government will typically come under probably the owner. Or how? Okay, so it depends on how you are seeing this. So what is the problem solved that you are trying to look into?
Coming to the regulation point of view.
Then if it's a regulation point of view, regulation is typically given by the government, right? So they will be the owners here. Okay. If the government says that you must increase the student strength of a particular course by 10%,
okay,
that has to be mandated or approved by the government, or it has to come down from the government. So typically that would come under owners.
Okay. And the society at large, the world view or the customers?
That will be worldview, sir. You are right. Society at large will be worldview. Because you're beyond your immediate system.
Yes, yes. That's it.
Good, sir. Very nice, sir.
Sir, I would also like to try.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Just a second, sir. Sir, again, if the issue at hand right now, which we are also facing, I think all of us are facing, is whether to start purely offline classes for the students or not. And we being at Madhya Pradesh, so the government, the state government also already gave permissions to start offline classes from 1st of December. But due to this new virus coming up, somehow again the things have been postponed, and again we are into the hybrid mode. So maybe if I take this issue, so whether it is good or not, so for that, customers again, I think is definitely the students. Yes, and the parents.
Yes.
Okay, because they are definitely going to be impacted by this decision majorly. And when I talk about actors, so actors are definitely the director, the management of the institute, Ministry of Higher Education, because somehow our decisions are always influenced by them.
So the department, the Higher Education Ministry would be the owner.
Okay.
Because it is they who are telling you that you need to go back to the hybrid mode.
All right. So even in that case, government would also be, government
The
will
owner.
be owner itself.
But
Okay.
you are the actor, the organization, the university where you are
Yes.
working, you are the actors.
Okay, so
You are
maybe
implementing it.
faculty and the staff as well will come in actors.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. Then moving on to the transformation, I think if I talk about transformation, so I expect that there will be better learning for students if there will be offline mode itself. So maybe in hybrid, because this is what we feel that not, when we talk about online classes, students are not able to learn that much because there are a lot of distractions at home. So I think this is what we understand that as faculties, we definitely want the students to come for offline classes, and even students also understand that maybe in offline classes, the learning and interaction is much better than the online classes.
Right.
So apart from that, I think one of the issues certain institutes are facing is that because of the online classes, in many of the institutes, students are not paying fees on time, and they think that they are overpaying because in offline cases they understand that the institute's overall cost is coming.
1 second, ma'am. 1 second. I think what you're trying to add here is also the environmental constraint. Now,
Okay.
under transformation, it is why are you doing this? So you're going back to online. Why? Because of the new strain of COVID virus, the Omicron strain. So we are going back to online. What is happening? Exactly that you're going back to online. It is not offline. It is back to online.
Yes.
How are you doing it? Through digital means.
Yes.
So that's all there is. Now, the why aspect of it, what is the impact of it? Like children not able to pay fees, parents again having an issue with their jobs, that will come under environmental constraints.
Okay. Fine, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. And what about if I talk about discipline, that, when we go back to online, so somehow that discipline we do not find in students that we find in offline classes. So is it a part of transformation or something else?
It will be a part of your constraint, ma'am. Because it's a problem. See, constraint by the very word is a negative term, right? It's holding you back.
Okay.
So anything that is not helping in progress, even paying fees, right? If you pay fees, the institute gets money, faculty gets paid their salaries on time. It's a positive if you look at it. So not paying fee, lack of discipline, children not switching on their cameras, not interacting, these are all constraints. Not having a good bandwidth, not able to top up their mobile data, the services going down, all these are environmental constraints.
Fine, sir. Fine. And yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
I think worldview, sir, you have already discussed. I think Indu Puri, sir, already explained that. So I think it's about the society at large when we talk about worldview, the impact of this decision. Owners, again, as discussed, it's the management and the government and the Ministry of Higher Education. And environmental, again, factors, all we have discussed, maybe the financial factors, that whether the parents are able to pay the fees on time or not, or there may be lots of rules and regulations that has to be followed, like social distancing and making sure that we are have certain norms in terms of taking their attendance or marking their attendance, or having examination at different platforms. So maybe that is entirely dependent on how this COVID. What is the impact of this virus on the different parts of the world and our students as well.
Absolutely. Wonderful.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. If anybody else would like to present, we can take probably one more. Otherwise, let's move on to the next topic. Would anybody like to share?
I think everything has been covered, sir. So both of them have covered all the participants.
Sir, we have one in the chat box.
Oh, okay.
Just read it for you, sir. CATWO for implementation of NEP 2020, customers, students, parents, society, employers, actors, management, faculty, and staff members, transformation, education system, student involvement, worldview, society, employer, owner, government, AICTE, university, and environmental constraint, resistance to change, and implementation. This is by Dr. Sudarshan, Mechanical, I believe.
Wonderful, sir. Wonderful. I think you captured most of the elements, sir. over 80-85%. Very nice. Just one small, I won't say correction, just a query that I have. Under transformation, you have explained certain points. So Praveen sir, can you read it once more? Under transformation?
Yes, sir. Under transformation, it is education system, student involvement.
Okay. So student involvement, how are you looking at it? If it is like how Madam just said, if it is like students are not opening up their cameras, then that will be an environmental constraint. That won't be a transformation. NEP's transformation is the why. Why do you need an NEP 2020? The what of NEP 2020? What is proposed in that? And the how aspect. So how do you plan? How does the government plan to roll out NEP 2020? So that is what will come under transformation. The why of NEP, the what of NEP, and the how of NEP. Other things, especially if it is negative, like student behavior, not paying fees, many academic institutions not being aligned to NEP or not being ready in terms of infrastructure or having the syllabus and all that reconstituted, that will come as an environmental constraint. Like the word here is constraints, sir, it is a negative term. So anything that is pulling you back from achieving that would come under a constraint here. So just to kind of explain that in detail. But otherwise, sir, you got everything spot on. You have beautifully identified all the stakeholders. So thank you, sir.
Professor, may I add something?
Okay, so let us now move into the next topic.
I'm sorry, can I ask you one question, sir?
Yes, madam.
Sir, I want to know, I mean, how can we implement this model? What exactly you suggest is, how can we use this model? I mean, in which kind of activities, whether in case of decision making, you want us to implement this model, or we can actually use it somewhere in...
lecture की आ रही है आपको?
Oops.
Sorry?
I know you're talking in between.
Okay.
Ma'am, so where do we implement this? As I said, it comes at the very outset. So when you're proposing a change, when you're proposing a change management, like the example that sir gave in the chat window, when you're trying to impose NEP,
okay,
the definition of NEP means there's a change in the entire educational system of the country. Humongous difference, right? Or demonetization, right? So when you're planning any change, or like the other madam said, when you're planning to go back to online mode of education, right? So who are all the stakeholders involved? And why is this?
Yes, sir.
And why is this important? Because it tells you how to relate to them, how to communicate with them, what will be the impact for those people, right? So it gives you a bigger picture. It is not like, okay, back to online. So children, from tomorrow onwards, please get your mobile phones ready. Please get your laptop or desktop ready. We are going to go back to online. No, because that means that the parents will have to top up their mobile phones, recharge them. They'll have to see that the children again have stocked up enough notebooks and all that material. And if the children, for example, had subscribed to another software like Byju's or Vedantu or things like that, have their subscriptions be renewed? What other things are dependent? So there's a huge ecosystem around. By using this framework, madam, you get to understand who are all impacted, who are all actually playing a role in the activity or the project that you are planning to roll out. So it comes at the initial stage of it, even before you action it out, before you implement it.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Right. So let us,
sir, I can see one hand raised, Dr. Renu Sirothia.
Yes, madam.
Heart patient. I would want to add that as we were discussing CATWO, so because now education institutes also have mandate towards executive education, so and even faculty development. So customers would also include faculties, customers would also include industry professionals who are coming for management development programs. And in the analogy, owners would also include the sponsoring organizations. For example, for Atal FDP's AICT, it becomes owner. And even for research purposes, owners would include the funding agencies or the regulatory bodies who are commissioning the projects, because institute becomes answerable to them, or they have to go by the budget.
Renu madam, spot on, absolutely right. By funding, you're actually either enabling that activity to happen, or you're curtailing it if you're curtailing your funding. Spot on, madam. Absolutely right.
Thank you, sir. Just wanted to add. Thank you.
Absolutely, you're spot on, madam. Exactly. Great. So nice to know that all of you are kind of, caught on to it, and it's just a question of fine tuning. So when you start implementing this tool in any scenario, you'll get more hands-on to it and you'll be able to work on better. But I am very happy to know that all of you have kind of understood this concept and who are all the constituents of CATWO. So thank you very much for, reconfirming my understanding. Now we are going to move on to our next very important thing. So again, moving on from the macro, which is, your CATWO, to user needs, you're coming to a micro level. So from L0 onwards, you're now coming to L3. So you're getting into the specifics here, right? Let me explain this with some examples. Before, at around 2018, 2019, the hand sanitizer industry was doing decent business. There were different requirements for people to use hand sanitizers, right? So for example, if a person is traveling and they stop at a tea shop, right? You're going on a vacation, you're driving your car, you go to a tea shop, you have a cup of tea and you have some bread and butter or bread and jam, and your hands get all sticky after eating it. Unfortunately, there is no water. What will you do? You have something like a hand sanitizer, which you immediately use, right? You have dry wipes, you have towels, but they tend to become sticky and messy. A hand sanitizer might help. Post March 2020, when the pandemic struck, the role or the need of your hand sanitizer went up that much more. There was a time at the outset in March, April, May, June, even July, when hardly any pharmaceutical shops, hardly any shops actually had hand sanitizers, right? There was such a huge need for it, and immediately you started seeing a huge ramp up. And post June, I think, one of the first things that will be kept in any shop is hand sanitizer. They might be selling Maggi noodles and all that, but beside the noodle packet, there'll also be a lot of hand sanitizers. It became ubiquitous. Almost every household has it. Today, I'm sure your classroom has it. You will be having it on the desk beside you. The office room will have it. Those of you who commute by cars will be having it in your car. Our lady faculty friends will be having it in their handbags, right? So it's become all pervasive. The need for hand sanitizers has gone up. While initially it was just used as a quick fix instead of washing your hands, now it has become an absolute necessity. Let us look at one more example, right? This is the example of Chick shampoo. The story goes like this. So Chick shampoo is a very, very popular brand. It started down south around Chennai by this very popular FMCG group called Kevin Care. So the founder or the head of Kevin Care, CP Rangarajan, when the story goes that when he was traveling in an auto rickshaw, right? I'm talking about early 80s, 1980s. When he was traveling in an auto rickshaw and he saw the auto rickshaw driver having unkept hair, long hair, matted and all that, he just asked him, sir, why don't you wash your hair? Wouldn't it be more, customer friendly if you look a little better, well groomed? And it seems that Autowala replied to him, to Ranganathan sir, that I wish I could do that, but you know what, shampoos are very expensive, and we are talking of the days when shampoos used to come in big bottles, like the big black bottle that you're seeing at the background at the center, right? So it's very expensive. 60 in those days, probably 40 rupees, 45 rupees was big money, right? I can ill afford to do that, so I use my daily bathing soap to apply it on my hair, but bathing soap does not retain the moisture on my hair, and so it ends up looking bad as it is. And that set our friend, the chairman of Kevin Care, thinking, why can't I make it affordable? Why can't I make it in such a way, packet it and market it in such a way that everybody in society gets it? He looked at an opportunity, and that's why they revolutionized by coming up with the sachet. So Chick is credited with being among the first companies to actually commit a sachet in the logistics aspect or the distribution of shampoo. So why should a person spend 40 rupees, those good old days, which was a humongous amount of money, rather just spend 25 paisa, right? Today we don't even hear about 25 paisa. 25 paisa or 50 paisa for a sachet of shampoo that he can use for a day or two, right? So by changing the way the business is, changing the way it is, he has expanded the scope of the product But he very, very, very importantly understood that there's a very unique user need. People want to use the product, but it was not affordable. He changed the way it was done. Let us look at one more interesting example that we can all connect with. Cafe Coffee Day, a very, very popular coffee shop down south. It's also prevalent much around other states as well. And I can tell you for a fact, because one of my job interviews actually happened in Cafe Coffee Day. So what did this, the chairman, unfortunately, he's no more, committed suicide due to certain issues. But he was a brilliant guy when it comes to exploring, uncharted waters, when identifying opportunities. When he was traveling around the villages of down south, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, he noticed that a lot of interesting discussions happen around the chaiwala shop. People, they sit on these wooden benches reading the newspaper. They gossip about politics. They gossip about cricket. So the local 80-year-old man in the village will be like, the alter ego of Sachin Tendulkar. He'll be saying, Tendulkar made this mistake. He shouldn't have put his foot forward and gone for that shot. That's what caught the wicket. He should not have done it. He should have taken a back step. This gentleman would not have played cricket at all in his life, but he's speaking on behalf of Sachin Tendulkar. But jokes apart, our friend, the former owner of Cafe Coffee Day, noticed that there's so much engagement that actually happens around this very humble chaiwala shop, right? Now, why should in cities a coffee shop just be a place where people come, drink and go? When he's building the coffee shop around, it should not be just about serving good coffee and biscuits and all the other items around light eating or tiffin, but he should also make the ambience so conducive that people will want to spend a long time there, right? And by spending a long time there, obviously it also means more business for him. So they'll keep reordering the coffee or ordering more biscuits and snacks and so on. But the idea that came out of it was he revolutionized the way food is. So it is no more like your Starbucks. It isn't expensive. It isn't a place where you grab a cup of coffee and you walk out. But it's a place where you can do a lot of things. When you walk into a Cafe Coffee Day shop, you'll notice that there'll be youngsters talking there for like an hour and a half or 2 hours. You'll see some people sitting with a novel, sipping a coffee, eating a biscuit and reading some book. You'll even see job interviews. As I told you, I had one of my very early job interviews in a Cafe Coffee Day when I was working with Indian Express. So a good place, sit in a corner, have your interviews, all that happens over there. So as the tagline says, much can happen over a cup of coffee, right? For boys propose to girlfriends, girls accept or reject a proposal. So whatever it is, it's a great ambience. It is going much beyond just offering a cup of good coffee, right? They revolutionized, they changed the experience of daily people having a cup of coffee when they're outside their homes. Now, what does this all talk about? Okay, so before that, let me also share one more very interesting story, right? A little more elaborately. This is a very interesting case study, if I can put it that way, because the earlier two examples were just, quick observations that we all have had. McDonald's is a very popular brand. We have talked about it enough yesterday, right? So they came up with this concept of milkshakes. And McDonald's milkshake is very popular. It's almost like a smoothie, if you want to put it that way, right? And when they were kind of doing research, they obviously roped in some market researchers. They roped in some academic faculty members who are good in doing market research. And they found out that having this product constituted the way it is, where it has elements of milk, it has elements of fruit in it, and so on. And being one of their first items of the day was actually a very good business idea. Why? Because in the United States, right, when people typically stay in large cities and many of them stay outside the city in suburbs, which are like 30, 40 kilometers away from office, right, they tend to start very early from home. They probably even start at like 6:30 from home to reach office by around 8 o'clock or probably at around 7. So they have to, get the house ready. They have to ask their children to get into the school bus, push them home. They might have to run quick errands for the house in the morning. So they hardly had any time to have a decent breakfast like that you see over here. So the typical American breakfast, if you notice here down south, at least I can say that we have idli, vada, sambar, pongal, puri, parota. Likewise in the north, right? In the US, you have typically a high calorie breakfast, which has croissants, eggs, sandwiches, a bowl of cereal and fruit, sometimes even meat in the morning. They have their bacon and eggs and so on and so forth. While it is all good in terms of nutrition, good value, having cereals and fruit in the morning is definitely good. It takes a lot of time to prepare it. And investing time in the kitchen in the morning means they end up being late at office. And Westerners tend to be known for their punctuality, to being there ahead of time, and to being very rigorous in the work they do. It's a discipline that they have in their culture. So what happened was McDonald's saw this as an opportunity. Uh, a very standard business of McDonald's is the concept of takeaway, right? So we say typically in South India parcel, you take your parcel food and you go. You don't sit at the restaurant and eat it, right? So likewise, they have the takeaway system. So people quickly grab what they have. They don't in fact get out of their cars. They just come by their car, stop at the counter. The person at the counter will take their order in a matter of a minute or less than a minute. Food is delivered. They drive away along with the food. So they noticed that to maintain the nutritional value of the people, of the customers, that kind of constitutes something around the breakfast that typically have, they need to design a type of a milkshake that serves them well. And it is not just the constituents of the milkshake, it has to also look at certain aspects of how these people consume it. If, for example, an office goer has a sandwich in his hand, or as a chocolate, or as a fruit, a banana, for example, how would that person drive a car with one hand and eat the fruit or the banana or the bread and continue to drive? It's a very dangerous thing to do, right? So looking at all these parameters, McDonald's came up with a very, very interesting observation and a suggestion based on the user's need. The user's need was, one, he has no time. Two, he needs to have something nutritious in the morning, at least such time that he reaches office or she reaches office and they have a quick bite in their office canteen, right? So in that amount of time, that half an hour, 40 minutes, what can be done? So that's when, based on those needs, they came up with these observations. What was the observation? That the milkshake or the shake that they're going to provide in the morning as one of the first items of the day, it should be obviously nutritious. They cannot serve chocolate milkshakes and very high calorie milkshakes because that is detrimental to health. So they had to have something like a smoothie. Two, the shake should obviously fill your appetite for that 40-50 kilometer drive for some time till that person reaches their office and they step into the canteen to have their breakfast. The stakeholder can, the shake holder, sorry, can be placed in the car. So while they're driving and while they're eating or drinking, it should be convenient to hold, right? So even when you're going to shift your gear, you can have that picture, that the shake holder, like you see in this picture in front of you, put in a holder, they can shift gears and continue to drink and, enjoy the drive without taxing them too much or taking their attention away off the road. They also noticed that while designing it, it should be held in one hand, right? So easy to operate, easy to hold. The shake should be viscous. It should be like a drink, like a fruit drink or like a Pepsi or a Coke, so it doesn't spill. It should be affordable. Very important in business. If you remember to the Chick shampoo advertisement, right? 40 rupee shampoo bottle versus a 50 paisa shampoo sachet. So pricing is everything. So it should be affordable and the shake should be easily made. So the turnaround time between an order and a delivery should not be more than 2 minutes or 1.5 minutes, right? So these were the things that they understood and they came out with the McDonald's milkshake, which is one of the most well-sold items in the market, especially for those very quick breakfast consumers because of the lack of time and lack of space and so on. It is something that you can see people having. And for those of us who watch a lot of English movies, you'll notice typically like that executives, they walk with a bottle, with a cup of coffee in their hands while going for a meeting or moving from one street to another and so on and so forth. So basically consuming or eating food while doing another activity is culturally or, made a part of their daily activities because of the constraints. Now, how do organizations typically come with such kind of, understanding of what the requirement the user is or the user needs? It's basically from three important things that we discussed yesterday. Can somebody tell me what they are? How do you come across what the user wants? We touched upon this while talking about different design thinking approaches. We spoke about this while working on the empathy map.
By being a detective?
Brilliant, sir. Brilliant. Yes, but what's that key word that we used? And this McDonald's example, when I told you about market researchers being a part of the exercise for McDonald's to come up with this product, what did they leverage? What skills did they use? Detective is absolutely one, sure. But what's that?
Sir, they empathized, felt from the customer's shoe how they should be doing or designing the product.
Exactly, madam. That is again completely required. But they use 3 sanity tools or 3 hygiene tools, which is like the 3 pillars of design thinking. I'm not talking of the laws, so don't confuse the 3 with the laws. The 3 very, very important qualities. Okay, so now you're going to remember, you might laugh at this. They employed listening, dialoguing, and observation.
Yes.
It is sine qua non, absolutely important in design thinking. Empathy, being a detective, being a cartographer, being a reporter, all these are the different roles that you tend to play. But what is the underlying skill, the underlying need is you need to listen, you need to dialogue, and you need to observe. And it is absolutely based on these 3 practices that organizations like Kevin Care, all your hand sanitizer companies, McDonald's, Cafe Coffee Day, they came to the understanding that, yes, this is what we'd like to propose to the market, right? So that is how they came up with understanding the user's need. Now, for us, now it's going to be the tool, how we need to do this. So yes, McDonald's applied these skills and they came up with this wonderful milkshake and so on. So we know that story. But now, when you're coming up with a user need, how do you actually create that user need? When I say create, how do you put that user need on paper? Now we know that, okay, students need to take courses online. We are going to continue to be digital at least for the next quarter, thanks to the new mutant variant of COVID-19 virus. So that said, how do I phrase that? What is the user need here, right? How do I do it? So there is a particular style in which it is written. And I would like to explain that again through a very normal, very everyday use, everyday product that we use, right? And that is by the example of a pen. Now imagine you are designing a pen, right? The average pen that we have. Okay, I hope you can see my pen here, right? How do you design that? Are you able to see me also?
No, sir.
No, we can just see the slides.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. The camera somehow got switched off. Okay, I will switch the camera on as soon as I'm through with this slide. So when you're, suppose for example, designing a pen, what would be the user need and how will you come up with the features of designing it? So the first point, and I would like you all to take this down, is you should focus on the what aspect of it and not the how aspect of it. For example, when you're talking of a pen, we should not say that the pen has a metal clip to fasten to the shirt pocket. That is being too specific, and it is being on the how. The pen has to have a metal clip. Why can't the clip be in plastic? And why should we say it has to fasten to the shirt pocket? So what it needs to be drafted as is the pen needs to attach to the clothing, right? The pen should be that kind of an equipment which can kind of attach itself or bind itself to the clothing so it does not fall off. How is a different thing that we can look into later, but the what needs to be addressed first. Second, you need to be specific on the user need. The user will want 100 things. But when you're proposing a solution, you need to be absolutely specific to answer that main 1000-gram item. Less is more, right? So when you apply those design thinking laws, it'll make sense over here. Be specific and be precise. So it is not to say that the pen is easy to use. Rather, the pen can be operated with one hand. You're being very specific now, right? So easy to use. I am a left-handed person. I'm a right-handed person. I'm ambidextrous. I can use both my hands. But in this case, that is not the requirement. The pen should be operated with one hand, irrespective of who the person is, how the person is aligned. Left-handed, right-handed, or probably he uses his legs to hand. Probably the unfortunate person does not have hands. So he writes with his feet. Ideally, the pen should be operated with one hand or with one limb. Be as specific as that. It's very important to have your user needs in a positive statement and not a negative statement. Here's the example. The pen is not messy, right? Let's not use negative connotation here. Rather, we can say the pen needs to be clean, right? The pen has to remain clean. It should not leak. It should have a cap. It should be easily maintainable. So the user should not have the fear that while putting it in the pocket, it may leak and so on. No, it should be clean, simple, positive, clear statement. There should be an attribute of the product or the service. So a functionality, a feature or an attribute should be explained. For example, I need a reliable pen. If you look at it, that's a very vague statement. What do you mean by a reliable pen? No, it sounds little vague. Rather, it should say the pen is reliable, right? So you're attributing the pen over here, right? Adjectivizing the pen. And finally, as far as possible, try to avoid using the terms such as must and should and try to make it sound, that was absolutely necessary. So instead of saying the pen should be affordable, we can say the pen is affordable. So basically, why do we make these small changes while drafting the user need? Is to make it sound one more pleasant, more parliamentary. It is not a hard and binding statement, which means it gives us a little more leeway to design the solution. And it is very, very clear to understand. So thus, while you're working on creating a new program, a new certificate course, a new diploma course, while you're writing a new book, right? Whatever it is, these are the points that you need to be wary of, to be aware of. First, address the what and not the how. Second, be specific. Be positive and never negative while working on a user need. Write the attribute of the product or the service. You are not necessarily in the picture. What is the attribute of the product or of the service you're offering? And better to avoid must or should, so you can give a little more leeway.
Rammohan garu leave.
So one more final example, if I may share before we kind of come to the closure of this session. I will share a very interesting example of Volvo. Now, Volvo is a very, very popular automobile brand, as you'll all be aware of, right? And it was very interesting that Volvo also has a very large percentage of women users. Typically, high-end cars and cars in general, the mental makeup or people tend to see it as though people, it is largely a male thing. Cars are generally masculine and men tend to drive it. Not necessary. If you actually look at it, there are a lot of women drivers also. And Volvo actually went one step further. So as per this case study, they took up an initiative way back almost 10 years ago in June 2002 by the women employees of Volvo Cars. They wanted to come up with a car that was completely designed by women, for women, of women. So it's like democracy, government for the people, of the people, by the people. So they wanted a car for the women, of the women, and by women. And they were targeting the most demanding premium customer, basically the independent professional working women, women who have their own opinions on everything, women who have a very strict, benchmark on what they want and what they don't want. They're very choosy, very particular, women who are, sticklers to what actually their requirements are. So that is the type of women they were looking at targeting at. And they found that in the US at that time, 54% of Volvo buyers were actually women, slightly more than 50%. That's a phenomenal number. And women buyers in the premium segment were obviously more demanding. So if you have that money to buy a niche vehicle, to buy a higher ranking vehicle, a premium segment car, obviously the demand is that much more, right? You're spending a lot of money, so you will want that amount of customization. So when this exercise were done by women designers, women drivers, women management, everything done by women, they came up with a brilliant piece, absolutely unique. And they also came up with very, very interesting results of the research. For example, women customers in the premium segment want everything that men want in terms of performance, prestige, and style. So where they were not compromising on the men want, they wanted that and they wanted extra. So what were their focus on? They wanted smart storage solutions. So while men, I'm sorry for the men faculty here, but generally the story was that when men are happy to use any storage location around the car to, park their cigarette packet or their lighters or their handkerchief or their milkshake bottles. Women were very specific when it comes to smart storage. They needed a place for everything and they needed everything in its place, right? So that was the requirement of women. A car that was easy to get in and get out of. Considering the dress that women, especially in the US, wear, skirts and so on, they needed a seat, they needed an entry and exit space that was very easy to get in and get out. No bending over, no reclining and things like that. Obviously, good visibility. Men tend to be a little taller than women, so they have that advantage. They needed a car that can give them good visibility in front, at the sides and so on. Very important, personalization. I'm investing close to $1 million, probably $100,000, sorry, for a car. Now, I need to personalize it. If I can shell out that much money, give it to me. I need to have some personalization. I want the seats to be in, sorry if I'm sounding a little stereotypical here, say for example, pink, or I want leatherite seats, or no, I'm an animal lover. I do not want leather at all. I'll use Rexin. And I want certain personalizations that make the car feel more at home, because it's an expression of themselves and their style. Minimal maintenance, very important. So while the men like to open the hood and get their hands dirty, for the women it is nope. The car should do exactly what I tell it. Absolutely minimal maintenance. I don't want any confusion. And the car should be easy to park, right? Though there are a lot of funny videos of women being a little what do you say, finding parking a little difficult to do. Women, when designing this car, said yes, there are certain issues like visibility. I'm not able to crane my neck back and see what's at the back of the car. I'm not able to see in front of the hood because I'm a little short. So I need a car that is easy to park. How will it make it easy? That's a different question. You can have sensors around. You can have special mirrors fitted in. The seat can be high. The hood can be shorter, whatever it is. But these are the requirements we have. And friends, these 6 requirements were over and above what was expected by men in terms of performance, prestige and style, right? So a totally unique vehicle meant for a very specific segment of their clientele, independent working women, right? So this basically brings us to a question. So wow, so when we are talking of cars, when we are talking of any such consumer durable, an automobile or whatever it is, there are obviously different types of users, right? You have what we call lead users, you have what we call extreme users, and we have users, right? There are different types of users if you can to look at it. So who are these lead users and who are extreme users? Let's take a look and let us see, as design thinkers, how can we leverage them? Because one thing is to kind of create the product for them, but another thing is more importantly to leverage their insight that they give us to see how can we better the product offering. So let us look at it. One thing is that the most innovative companies don't just stop at understanding the primary user or the main user. They go extra by understanding the extreme users, so that one, they can learn from them,
You
two,
can
they
say
can design the
them.
product.
They will open it.
This is
They
how
will open it. हाँ.
उसके बाद शिफ्ट बोला आप क्या करेंगे जाएंगे अच्छा जी बोलिए कि आप इससे बात करो
Which is lying on the same side of Dr. Ramakrishnan sir, we are unable to hear you. And front side is Ram, you have to stimulate.
So you are not audible.
Sir, you muted your mic.
Okay, I don't know how that happened. Let me, okay, let me share my screen again. I'm sorry about that. I didn't mute it as far as I remember. Just give me a second, madam. Let me put it back in slideshow mode. Yes. Can you see me? No.
No, Ram.
Okay. I don't know why when I'm sharing my screen, the camera tends to go off.
Ram, I think it's a limitation from browser. I think it happens with me when I join from browser and try to share screen. My camera automatically goes off. It's a technical limitation. I feel from browser. Huh?
Acha. Okay. Thanks, Ramna. Thank you. So sorry. I hope I'm audible at least.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. So so as I was saying, if you can segment your user, there are typically 3 segments, right? You have your lead users, the people who are waiting to pay extra money to buy your product, people who are waiting in queues before you launch the product, people who are just ready to even bribe the store people so that they can get the first piece in their hand. They're dying to buy your product. Then you have your average users, the people who tend to wait for a few weeks, read reviews, touch and feel the product, see if it works for them, look at the budget, look at different other options and all that, but they still buy the product because they like the product. And then there are some extreme users, people who are at the other end of the spectrum, who use the product in different, more than the intended usage. So while you might assume that a smartphone is used to make calls, to take calls for WhatsApping and so on, some people buy an iPhone exclusively to use it as a camera. I know friends who have been working in the, not in the film industry, in the documentary industry, where they're taking portfolios and all that of popular dancers and musicians. They don't take their DSLR camera or their video camera and go. They just take a high-end smartphone, a typical iPhone, with the gimbal and other equipment. They go to the artist's house and they do the portfolio shoot, either a video or photographs, only using an iPhone, nothing else. There might be some lighting devices here and there, but in terms of recording the image or the video, they use that. And they use that product exclusively only for taking photos and videos. They do not take phone calls from that, right? So basically, they're using only 1 or 2 features of that very expensive smartphone, the iPhone, and they use it for that. They don't use any other feature. So they're extreme users. But understanding these users is very, very, very important. Why? Because you get insights from all these segments, both from the lead users and from the extreme users. Let me give you one more example when you're talking of users in a slightly different context. When you buy a bottle of Bisleri water, right, drinking water, who are all the users there? You are the user because you buy the bottle of water, right? You use the water and then you dispose of the bottle, the plastic bottle, right? But then if you look at the picture, who are all the other users? It is the person who collects the garbage, right? Not the scavenger or the person who collects used plastic bottles. They are one extreme user. Going a little further beyond them, it is the small industry that thrives on using, recycling used bottles. So they clean the bottle, they crush the bottle, they either repurpose the plastic for other things, or if the bottle is in good condition, they wash it and they give it back. This especially happens with liquor bottles, which are made of glass. So these liquor bottles are typically used, cleaned, and they're recycled and sent back to the liquor manufacturer so that the bottle is reused to sell liquor again. So though it's not a very good example to share, just a quick example of how extreme users are, right? So typically both, some people who are at the front of the curve and those who are at the end of the curve are your extreme users, the lead and extreme, and you get a lot of insights from them. And so what basically happens is that understanding these people will also help you to look at the way your product can further develop. It gives you insights to what more can be done with your product. And that is also a way of observing and seeing scope for development, right? So that was it in quick. I think we have about 15 minutes left. I wanted to give you one more short assignment or short activity. The activity is this: how do you draft the user need of a proposed academic diploma program? I'm not talking of a certificate program. I'm not talking of a degree program. In between, a diploma program. So if you have a target audience in mind, if you have a target topic in mind, and you would like to make this as a diploma, how would you draft the user need? So if you go back to the example that I had shared, Where was that? Yeah. What and not how, be specific, positive and not negative, attribute of the product, here in this case a service, and avoiding compulsory terms like must and should. So if you could apply these statements, these directives, how will you draft the user need for a diploma program? So if you have any questions, let's take this up now, or I will suggest that you can probably put pen on paper and try to draft that quickly. So you just have about 5 points. And how will you draft the user need of a diploma program? So can we do this example now? I don't think it'll take more than 5 minutes. But in the meantime, if you have any queries, thank you, ma'am. If you have any queries in the meanwhile, do let me know. There is a very specific reason why I said it should be a diploma program, not a certificate program and not a degree program. So coming kind of via media in between. Any questions, anybody? Since some of you had asked for my contact details, I have shared my mobile number and my email ID over here. So yes, if you'd like to be in touch with me with the School of Design Thinking, we will be more than happy to have a discussion with you, understand what your needs are. And if you have any queries regarding the application of the tools that you are learning. So yesterday and today, I taught you a few tools. Ramnath, my colleague who also spoke during this session, will be taking you to some very interesting tools in the coming session at 11:30. And Satyanathan will also be taking you into certain very, very fundamental questions that you need to ask at the outset of any design thinking program or any project that into which you plan to apply design thinking. So there are some very interesting tools coming further up your way. So, but in the meanwhile, here are my contact details. So those of you who would like to reach out to me, me being a part of the School of Design Thinking, I'm more than happy to answer your queries or, to have a dialogue with you.
Thank you for such a nice.
Welcome, ma'am.
You have shared. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Are there any questions that you might have? Any doubts? Any further clarification? In fact, if there are any different perspective or different view, it would be wonderful to have a discussion. So.
So I do not find any question in the chat box, sir.
There are no questions. All right. Okay.
Right. If in case anyone have any query, they can raise their hand, unmute themselves.
That's it. I think we have about 10 minutes more. Yesterday was very tight. We finished probably exactly on dot. So yeah, if you have any queries today, do let me know.
Sir, the question you asked regarding this diploma course. So yes. What if I would like to introduce a diploma in digital marketing, for example?
Okay.
So is it like, if I would like to be very specific, so what and not how, if I think about, so can I mention that I would like to make the students employable?
That is an outcome.
Okay.
Making students employable is an outcome. What I would probably you might want to ask is, what is it that you're teaching, or what is that mission statement of that program?
Okay.
Right. So being employable is the outcome. That's the result. But what
Okay.
is the program about is important.
Okay, so what I'm going to offer, or what is the objective of this offering, is what I'm supposed to mention here.
Correct. And by specific, you are going to state whether it's an online course, for example, an offline course, hybrid course, right?
Okay.
So if you, for example, the pen example, it says pen can be operated with one hand. So if you want to directly translate that here, the course can be taken in online mode.
Yeah.
So things like that.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Now, some of you might ask, why do we need to phrase the user need like this, right? What is the requirement for such a tool in phrasing a user need? When you're looking at a user need, there is a very interesting case study. Probably Ramnath or Satya might be taking that case study to you. Basically, the story is that in one country which was having a lot of old age homes, they found that despite the food being good and nutritious, a lot of elderly people were not consuming it and they were having nutrition problems. And when they were looking at deep diving into the problem statement, they actually took a relook at how they actually looked at only one part of the problem, but there were multiple parameters that came into being. And so the entire user need completely changed, right? The way the solution was completely different from what they initially thought. They thought that the food was not good, or the elderly people were, not interested in the food, which was partially right. But when they deep dive, applied listing, dialoguing, observation, did the CATO analysis, understood who are all the stakeholders involved in the problem, and when they wrote the user needs, they found it to be completely different. The entire scope of that project was so different. A very interesting project. It happened in a very advanced European country, strangely. But that shows why, understanding the user needs and drafting a positive user need is very, very, very important.
Sir, can I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
I think the more analysis we do like this, are we all moving towards customization or personalization of our products and services? And somehow nowadays, I don't find much company who are actually coming up with, with products for mass markets. So can we say that ultimately all of us are all the companies will be moving towards customization, and there will be hardly any products for mass market?
Very good point, Dr. Nidhi. What you're saying is right in terms of a trend, because what is it ultimately we need? We need a direct correlation, a direct relationship with the product or service that we are buying or paying for, right? And by getting so deep into the analysis and even more into the stories behind all the analysis, is yes, targeting products to be very, very specific. Again, applying the law of design thinking, the last 2% equals 200%. That is the customization we're talking about. How are you going out of the way to make that particular customer happy? So in a way, your observation is spot on.
Thank you.
And that's exactly what design thinking is for. It is to make everything human centric. When you are spending 1 lakh rupees in buying a particular product or in using a service, wouldn't you want it to be customized for your requirements? Why should you compromise on something, right? So that's where it is. It's all about the end user. It's all about the user being exactly at the center.
Okay, sir. So I think there is no more questions. So it was a fantastic session, sir. Let me give you a very small vote of thanks. But that was really the example which you have given of McDonald's or Chick or Cafe Coffee Day, and the way you have given the information about CatWow and how the involvement of the participant, that was really engaging. And I'm sure the participants have taken notes of all what we have thought. And of course, as I keep on saying that they keep on pushing me by sending me messages in WhatsApp. Please ask sir to give the notes and PowerPoint presentations.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
So that definitely, sir. Thank you. If in case you will share with me, I will share with them. Meanwhile, I found that Dr. Nidhi Sharma has raised her hand once again. So Dr.
Yes.
Nidhi, you want to say something?
I just wanted to express my gratitude again to Dr. Ramakrishnan. So I think all of us will agree that, it is very difficult to, give a lecture to faculties because we have the habit of speaking and not listening much. So I think making us listen so patiently, and it was such an interesting session that, we actually did not want to miss anything that you were actually sharing with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Sir. Thank you.
This is a great validation for me, ma'am. So thank you.
Meanwhile, I have also the opportunity to welcome Dr. Ramanath Prabhu, who will be taking the next session from 11:30 a.m. onwards. And we are looking forward to your session, sir. I'm sure that will also be as engaging as this session. And as Dr. Ramakrishnan was talking about the Good Kitchen example, so we are eagerly waiting to listen from you about that case study. So with that notes.
And Praveen sir, since you said about Good Kitchen and my session will end at 1:30, I won't come in between lunch and people. I'll try to finish between 1:30 and
Unstated requirement. Yes.
Yes. So
Right,
by before 1:30, I had to finish, right?
Right, sir. Right, sir.
I'll try to finish before that. So.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. So with that notes, we bring an end to this session. Thank you very much to all the participants who joined here. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ramakrishnan, sir. Thank you, Ramnath, sir, for your valuable inputs. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Bye-bye.